you're not going anywhere. So we want to make sure that we get out the maximum out of our speakers. So we're like definitely making sure that we keep you here. So with that, we'll have another very interesting conversation that Gwendolyn will host here. So since you have introduced yourself, I don't need to introduce yourself anymore. But what is left for me is really to thank you also to engage in this, to be so open to host so many things. I know being on 2 discussions in a row.
Back to back, right?
Back to back can be tough. So please give a big round of applause, and then Gwendolyn can introduce her speaker and guest for the conversation on stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks again. I guess I'll sit on this chair now. So I would love to introduce the guest for this fireside chat, and Tim of Oceanic Partners. Do I see you? Yes. Hi. Please, everyone, give him a warm round of applause. Tim. So our title for this fireside chat is Investing in Leaders. Tim, you've done so much. You've been operationally, you've led operational stuff. You've invested across both early stage, late stage. You've organized crowdfunding and stuff like that. When you look across that spectrum of investing across several stages and geographies as well, when you see the companies who are leading their field, what are some of the case studies that for you really stick out the most in terms of them having kind of unique leadership? It could be business model, it could be how they've done a paradigm shift in whatever they're doing.
Yeah, so I guess when I think about leadership, I think about 3 different aspects of it. I think of the leaders themselves, I think about leading companies, and I think about the concept of leadership. With regard to leaders, I think historically people have thought, going back to Plutarch and the book he wrote called Lives, that leaders were born. They weren't made. Monarchs were leaders and things like that. Well, as time has passed, that belief has largely been disavowed.
But what is your belief?
My belief I guess it's multi-tiered. On one side, I believe great leaders guide their companies towards something, and they do it through evangelizing the message, giving people a sense of purpose, and giving people also, individuals, a sense of context, so they know what they're doing in the context of the greater vision or theme. In terms of leaders that I think about of great companies in Silicon Valley, a wise friend of mine pointed out that most of them lack empathy. If you look at Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon, Mark Pincus, all these kind of...
At least these are kind of common, by the mass public, we think of them that way. But I don't know them personally, so I can't say.
Oh, I can tell you personally, that's how they are. Yeah. I've known several of them for a long time, and some of them, when you talk about them when they're not around, you say, oh, so-and-so, that person who has more ex-friends than actual friends, because it's hard for people with no empathy to maintain friendships, but they can be great leaders.
Can you be both?
Yeah, you can be both, and we invested in a company that is a ride-sharing company in the U.S. Some of you have heard of, some of you probably haven't, but it's called Lyft, and I think that is a great example of leaders who actually embody values and morals and do express empathy on a corporate level.
When you say that, can you give me some examples? Are you talking just more within the team, or can that also be reflected in how the company is doing the business?
It can be. So, with respect to Lyft, they're very community-oriented. In fact, they're an asset-light infrastructure play, so that they don't have any offices in the cities that they operate in. They primarily work through mentor groups and community groups to grow the business. Adversely, you've got Uber, which is 100% the opposite. They're extremely asset-heavy. There's a ton of infrastructure. They buy buildings and build out infrastructure just so they can launch in a certain jurisdiction. When capital is free and frictionless, which it had been in the private markets for Uber, that was fine, but it's not that I don't believe is a great business model in the long run.
So when you talk about that, I would love to kind of understand more kind of within the company, right? When you say that the Lyft founders have more empathy, and yeah, the community-driven, you know, they kind of rely on that a little bit more to grow their business. But I mean, you work to the team, right? You work with the founders.
Yeah.
How are meetings held in the sense that how do you encode empathy as a value, encode human values into kind of running your meetings, for example?
Sure, and I'll take it from the perspective that I know it from, which is really secondary trading and investing in these companies. If you were an employee of Uber, for example, and despite the fact that Uber was private for more than 10 years, selling your stock, unless you were Travis, was virtually impossible. When people started working for startups back in the 80s and 90s, the expectation was that those companies were going to go public in 2, 3, 4 years. Obviously, since 2001 and 2008, things got even worse. Companies stayed public for 10, 12, 14 years. Some companies, Palantir, for example, still private. During that period of time, individuals' lives change. They have kids, they buy a house, they need a new car, their kid needs a heart operation. I mean, I've seen all of these things in real life happen. And if you worked for Uber, there's nothing you could do. You couldn't sell your stock. You could get zero liquidity despite the hardship. Lyft, on the other hand, we worked with very closely for a number of years. If somebody wanted liquidity, they sent them to us, and we helped them out and moved on our way. And it was win-win. It was win for the company because they solved an issue, with one of their employees who needed help. It was obviously a win for the individual, and it was a win for us because we had business, and part of our business is service.
So kind of going back to the link between your first assertion that kind of some of the greatest founders out there have no empathy, and Lyft is a contrary example to that. When we look at from a global perspective, then what I feel is that I see a lot of people, they are like looking to emulate these founders, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I want to be an Elon Musk, but we don't know that. I mean, Elon Musk, he has a whole other personal story behind that, which is not as great, I think, as his business, for example, businesses, right? And when I see that, I see there's a danger, right? So we're linking to that with social media. To me, that changes a lot of the dynamics of it because a lot of the stories get propagated more, again, all the sexual harassment and stuff like that. And so now you see a lot more companies kind of like, you know what, we're going to look for diversity. We are having a robust policy against sexual harassment. I mean, how do you see that changing and evolving over the next few years?
Social media is pretty tricky because I think in the beginning it was a great disruptive, innovative technology that allowed people to share things with their friends and feel like they were part of something greater. Unfortunately, that's turned into something different today. And what it is to me, and I've got kids, it's if you want followers, you follow other people, and then you create this.
You follow me, I follow you. Follow for follow, right, or something.
Follow for follow, and then somebody has a lot of followers, and they feel good about themselves, and they check their phone to see if anybody liked their post, and this and that, and what it's done, unfortunately, is it's caused people to focus more on their phone than on personal relationships, and what makes people successful, I think, in life is personal relationships and building out their networks. That's what gets you more involved. Getting more involved in your community, getting more involved in the greater aspects of life are generally make you happy. If you're not involved, and science is the metric here, it leads to depression and all sorts of terrible things, suicide, et cetera. So, in fact, with the advent of social media, suicide and depression in the United States is at an all-time high.
And when you say that, Yet in this world, social media precisely, because it started off as like a great force for good, but this is just a tool. It can also be used for good and bad. So when you say that, yes, scientifically it's proven, yes, we should be involved in our communities, it's a much more physical aspect. But then again, weak links that the internet enables, it's so powerful, right? You can easily talk to someone, find someone of your niche interests, 10,000 miles across the seas kind of thing. So how should people here, entrepreneurs here, kind of look to kind of managing their own lives and their digital habits, I guess, combining the two? Is there a good way to do that?
Take it to the next level. Meet with your friends and family, and it doesn't matter if they're 10,000 miles away or 10 feet away. Stop staring at your phone.
So do you think that now that leaders of companies, right, leaders of organizations who are gigantic right now, is there a moral imperative for them to be good people?
No.
Oh, I would love to hear more. Tell me more, why no?
No, being a great leader has nothing to do with moral imperatives. It has to do with growth and hopefully a path to profitability.
For the company, right?
Yep.
But how about, companies exist within a societal framework. You exist in society, you're touching the lives of consumers right here. So I would argue otherwise that, and especially with social media, that we are looking up towards these companies and then to these leaders.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because social media, any company, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever, is just an avenue for that corporation to make money, usually through selling ads or services or anything else. It's not meant to create a moral turpitude or some sort of higher bar. It has nothing to do with that. It's about ad sales.
It's about assets? So for you, when you run your companies, are you an empathetic individual?
Personally, I try to be empathetic.
You
yes.
try to be? So do you think that it conflicts with running good businesses for you? Have you had personal conflicts in the past?
I'm sorry?
Personal conflicts in the past where, doing one thing means that it's bad for business, but it's good as a human being.
Yeah, I think that certainly arises from time to time, and it's very circumstantial. There's no general perspective that I have on that. I take it on a case-by-case basis. Case
by case, but do you have like a framework to think about things? Your decision-making variable kind of thing? What do you weigh, What most weighs it? Is it guilt that you feel regarding something? What factors
as far as my company goes, it's always for the greater good. If somebody is off the reservation doing something that's unproductive, there's consequences for that. And it's a team of teams. Everybody's working together, hopefully moving towards the same vision.
And to that then, how much do you work operationally with the portfolio companies that you're investing right now? How much time do you spend with each portfolio company?
I would say we spend most of our time with our portfolio companies when it involves trading. So we're working with general counsels and CFOs and their legal teams on a daily basis. So that's part of our business.
So it's much more strategic business kind of choices, right?
For us, our focus is really on liquidity. So we're helping them come up with new ideas to help them manage liquidity on a large scale.
So for some of these companies then, when you talk about liquidity, do you see that changing over the next few years? So the panel that was just before, like one of my personal points was that, with something like SoftBank Vision Fund, like throwing $1 billion at random companies, not random
Terrible
companies.
idea.
Yeah, right? It's changed the dynamics, right? So how is that changing?
Well, first of all, SoftBank, if you're an investor and you're in a company that SoftBank funds, the minute that check hits, run, get out of that company. Because it pushes out the liquidity event, and it really screws up the company, because a lot of times they have now more money than they know what to do with it, and they're not fiduciarily responsible in the ways that maybe a public company would be. They don't have to report. There's no Qs and Ks, and there's really limited liability. So I think...
But then if they don't take their $1 billion, their competitor's going to take them.
There's plenty of money out there for great companies. You don't need to go to SoftBank and take $1 billion at a valuation that you're not even close to. that you're going to grow into over the next 2 to 3 years. If you look at the case studies, take WeWork for example, it has been a disaster since they partnered up with SoftBank.
When you say that, can you, I thought the business, they launched like something over the last few years that has kind of grown. WeWork, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when you say it's gone down, what do you mean by that?
Their ability to raise capital has basically dried up because the valuation that they raised at...
They're overpriced?
It was overpriced. The founders took their eye off the ball. They started doing things like buying jets and spending money on things that had nothing to do with the company. So the company's growth actually stagnated. The next infusion of money by SoftBank that didn't happen really caused a lot of confusion. And in the private market where they exist, the valuation for their stock dropped dramatically after that happened because no one could fund it. SoftBank didn't want to do it, and now what are they going to do? So it put them in a really bad spot.
So obviously, is this sustainable then? No, right?
No, I don't think well, is WeWork sustainable or SoftBank?
SoftBank, yeah, both.
I think SoftBank's type of funding is a bad idea and not sustainable. And I think one thing that goes to show that is the lack of the Saudis going back in to their next fund. If you can't get the Saudi money in there.
And the question is that do they even want the Saudi money right now, right? Because of the Saudi money, many people are like, putting out on social media, boycott Vision's fund because they have Saudi money.
Yeah, I mean, I don't put a lot of faith in social media saying that SoftBank is. If SoftBank has money and you're a startup that really needs it, you're going to take it. And I think that the dynamics of those deals that SoftBank is doing, they're going to change because what they have been doing, again, is not sustainable.
I wanted to go back kind of the individual, right? Because we talked a little bit beforehand, and I want to kind of combine the thoughts of again, leadership in companies and leadership kind of as an individual. You mentioned for example, you wouldn't be where you're here today because of where you kind of spent your early career. Can you talk through a little bit more about that?
Well, I grew up in Palo Alto, California, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, and through essentially relationships that I maintained over the years that enabled me to participate in the life and career I have today. If I perhaps had grown up in Iowa, I wouldn't have had any exposure to the people and things that were happening. So I credit it to time and place and circumstance, and then really maintenance of relationships.
But for people of us, we are in Cluj-Napoca right now, we're in Romania. What do you think of the ecosystem here, and do you think that people should move then to another city? Back to Silicon Valley is still leading in many different ways. I mean, for example, the company I'm with, EF, we exist because we think that there's great, ambitious potential founders. They exist globally, and we're trying to bring them a platform, right? So we're trying to go against the thesis of no, you don't have to go to Silicon Valley. Even myself, I spent many years in Southeast Asia. So we believe that opportunity to be made, but here you are saying that, that kind of compound interest effect from being born, physically in close relation with other people, that really helped. And I believe that. But from now on, how can we, kind of act on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was in the Startup Avalanche judging team yesterday, and one thing I noticed is that each of the Romanian companies, on a personal level, everybody else here knew them and had backstories, and I mean, relationships clearly matter to people here in Romania. And I think depending on what business you're going for, if you're going for a Romanian business that's not going to scale outside of Romania, and some businesses make sense to do that, then you don't need to go visit Silicon Valley. There's no point. If you really think you have a huge idea and you want to go global, then you should go to Beijing, and you should go to Silicon Valley, and you should go to the places where you think the customers are and validate it. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of great businesses that don't have to extend outside of Eastern Europe or even Romania.
Okay, I think that's kind of all the time we have. So thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your insights.
You.
Thank you. My name is Gwen, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.